Hello and welcome to a very special Hawk Talk here this evening. I'm your host, Eddie Acapinti. We're happy to have you along for another episode. Hard to believe, but we've already now done 31 episodes. Episode number 32 tonight is indeed a special one. No doubt the thing on the forefront of most parents and students' minds is getting back to school. And now that we are in October, it's been about a month and change and schools are back. So with that, we are happy to present our education panel here on Hawk Talk. 4 student athletes, all Monmouth alums, all at different spots in the education system, all in different roles, and 3 different Monmouth sports represented here this evening. So we really appreciate all of them joining us. We'll say good evening. We'll go individually around the horn. We have 2 football alums on our show tonight, and we first say good evening to the superintendent in Long Branch, former Monmouth football player, class of '96, Dr. Mike Salvatore. Mike, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for the invite. Looking forward to having a great conversation tonight. Thanks, Eddie.
Well, it's our pleasure. And by far, as you can see, Mike is the most well-dressed of our panel here tonight, making all of us jealous. And we appreciate him being able to join us. We go around the horn to, and I did mention it's Dr. Mike Salvatore, just like our next guest, the recently awarded and very well-deserved Dr. Vinny Sasso, just a couple of weeks ago, walked across the field at Kessler Stadium with his doctorate in education, the principal at Old Bridge High School, Monmouth class of '98. Vinny, how you doing tonight?
Doing great, Eddie. Thank you so much. Really a pleasure to be here. It's always awesome coming back and being a part of everything at Monmouth, which is first class. And so thank you again. And yeah, that was great. That was great having you too. Call my name on the field, Kessler Stadium. It felt like the old days for a minute.
Well, I was just going to say, the only difference would have been I'd prefer to be up in a booth announcing. I'm sure you'd prefer to have pads and a helmet on the field, but outside of that, it was pretty perfect.
It sure was. Thanks, Eddie.
Our next guest here this evening, a 6th grade teacher right next to Monmouth's campus at Frank Antonides School in West Long Branch, women's lacrosse alum, a broadcast colleague of mine calling some women's lacrosse games on ESPN3 and ESPN Plus, class of 2001. Erica Kaufman-D'Elia joins us this evening. And Erica, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, Eddie. How are you?
No, I'm doing very well, thank you. The last time I think Erica and I were on something like this, we each had headsets on and we were announcing a lacrosse game at Kessler Stadium. So thanks for joining us tonight, Erica. And our last guest, also someone who's done some broadcast work for me on the softball diamond, Monmouth class of 2014, and currently a speech-language pathologist at the Red Bank Primary School. We say good evening to Alicia DeSanto. Alicia, how you doing?
Hi, Eddie. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure again, and I speak for all of us with Monmouth University Athletics, for really the university as a whole, and thank all 4 of you for taking time out of your no doubt busy fall schedule to join us here this evening. All of our panelists tonight, Monmouth alums with multiple degrees for the most part. Everyone is a student athlete and a student athlete alum who joins us here tonight. And the topic of the evening is education indeed, and it's going to be the education that we discuss for the next hour or so, depending on the conversation here on Hawk Talk. And we start right here. We've got administrators, we've got teachers, we've got a pretty well-rounded panel here for our education panel. And I want to begin with something I read recently. The superintendent of North Brunswick Township, Dr. Brian Zakowski, had a pretty cool quote, and I want to get your all thought on this. He said in this new world that we're living in with education that we're all freshmen in the new world. I thought it was a pretty appropriate quote. So, Mike, we start with you. And how are things going in Long Branch? Virtual, in-person, hybrid? We begin there with what's currently going on in your district.
We've got everything going on in the district, from remote learning to crazy hybrid schedules to teleworking. I mean, Brian hit the nail on the head. I said it's more like your first year all over again for everybody. This is my 10th year superintendent, 23rd in the district, and it feels like the first year, you know, with a little less crying involved. But for the most part, it is just learning all over again, and everybody's going home exhausted because everything's new. So whether you're sitting in a chair for 8 hours on Zoom, you're still mentally exhausted. And we have a lot going on, but it's an exciting time too, because, you know, it's so historic. I mean, once we eventually get through this, everything we've done is really probably going to elevate the entire profession.
It's an interesting point that you bring up. And I think so much of what all of our guests on Hawk Talk, whether they're educators, whether they're coaches, I think they've echoed those sentiments that a lot of the technology that brings us all together now is going to be something that we can continue using. Just example, on our call here this evening, we're all on Zoom, even though we're on Facebook Live, and it's just a small example of how we're all brought together. So that's the view of what's going on in Long Branch. Now we bounce around a little bit, just a few minutes away from Long Branch. Alicia, let's go over to Red Bank. Are you able to go in? I know you're a speech language pathologist. Are you virtual? Are you in person? Or like Mike, a little bit of everything?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of everything. So we have 4 different cohorts. We're using a hybrid model, half days, and Wednesday is a virtual day for everybody. So I am doing a hybrid model for therapy as well. Anybody that is successful with teletherapy, that's what we're doing to minimize exposure and movement throughout the school. I work with 3-year-olds, so they are not happy to be sitting in front of a computer screen working with me. So I am working with some kids in person, but we're limiting how many classrooms I'm moving around to. So I'm in 4 days a week and working from home 1 day a week so far.
So the 4 days a week, it seems to be a lot, but as we were talking before we came on air here this evening, there is one of our panelists that has that beat by 1 day. And Erica, I know as you and I were catching up a little bit what's going on in West Long Branch, you're indeed one of the very few districts in New Jersey that is 5 days a week.
Correct, Eddie. Last I heard, before the school year started, there were only about 10% of schools in New Jersey where the students were in every day. We happen to be one of them. I think because we are a very small school district, we were able to take precautions to keep everybody safe with the goal of getting the students in as frequently as possible. So everybody is in the building with the exception of those who opted for 100% virtual instruction. The rest of our educators and students are in every day for half a day.
And as we referenced in the open, Erica is a 6th grade teacher at Frank Antonity School, which is just down the street from Monmouth University. And Vinny, now as we get to your role as the principal of Old Bridge High School, I know you and I had a chance to catch up getting ready for this. And indeed, I know that Old Bridge at this point is virtual, but how has that been for you so far? I know that you, as well as so many educators, would love the chance to be in and to be with everyone.
Yeah, so currently we are all virtual in Old Bridge throughout the district, and we're about to transition to a hybrid model. The plan is starting Monday, October 12th, that we will start to transition with small groups of students, starting with our most vulnerable students, our special needs students, and then working through some of our younger grades, kindergarten first. So our high school is not actually going to start until November 9th. So I'll be all virtual until November 9th. And it's been difficult. It's been, as Mike mentioned, we're all working so hard. It's different, but, I talked to so many of our teachers who are just amazing. I mean, what our teachers are doing this year in particular is really just outstanding work. And they're working so hard and really learning as they go, but making a difference every day. And so, it's hard, right? It's hard being virtual and not being in front of our students. And, I like to listen to Dr. Salvatore's messages as he puts those out on YouTube. And he talked about, in his latest message, he had talked about the energy that, teachers and students, when they're together in the classroom and they're, learning and teaching, the energy that you get from that interaction is amazing. And that's what's missing right now, And so, we're doing our best and we're making it through as best we can. And you just hope that, eventually all health and safety protocols are in place and everyone can feel safe and be safe and get back to that in-person learning that, you just can't replicate virtually.
Yeah, and I think so much of what all of us who aren't necessarily, now obviously I work at Monmouth University, different ball game where you guys are educating every single day with students. And I've seen what's gone on campus, but I know that this has been the conversation really since last March, getting ready for now what has happened. Education is always at the forefront of things in New Jersey, no different this year. And Vinny, I think a point that you made that Mike recently made, I think that's one that we is an interesting one to kind of get into. So hard to replicate that experience of being with people in the same room. It's so hard when you're a young person to be able to understand how important things are through technologies like this and like Zoom. Have you guys, and really I'll open the floor, I guess, seeing those success stories happening early. Like Vinny said, teachers adjusting on the fly. Erica is a teacher. Alicia, obviously, with what she does with therapy, having to adjust. And are you able to see, I know through so many challenges, but those little wins that, you're all student athletes formerly, you're all athletes. You take the little wins to equal the big ones. Have you started to see those a little bit the first month of the school year that gives you that kind of optimism headed forward?
Well, I think there's just an obvious evolution that's occurring here. So, like we were talking the other day, when kids come back, are we going to actually have enough technology in the school if we have some at home? And then they're like, well, what do we do if we don't have the technology? And I said, well, remember paper? Remember pencils? Like, we can still use those things from the last century. I mean, we've seen this evolution, but it's not just in technology. We've seen it in how social schools are right now. So, because putting kids back in rows with paper and pencil seems like something archaic, but what we're really learning is that school is a very unique social system, and it's not just about social relationships; it's social projects too. There's a lot of discussion and protocols in class, so we're not just missing the content and the kids and the energy. The kids are missing a complete social experience that is really challenging, I think, right now. And that's what Vinny's talking about, and I'd love to kind of hear how Erica and how Alicia are kind of managing this educational component without socialization. I can't even imagine being a speech language therapist trying to make sure children have adequate language in a remote setting. I mean, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, March came and April, and I was like, what are we going to do? We can't do this. But you know what? The kids surprise you. They have adjusted so well. And I think one of the best things that came from this for me as a therapist was, in a school, you are go, go, go. I am in and out all day, taking different kids from classrooms. I don't have a lot of time to speak with parents on a daily basis. And during this teletherapy component, the parents are right with them the whole time. So really, there has been a huge, eye-opening experience for me where the parents are seeing what I'm doing with these children a half hour, an hour a week. And if they can carry that over at home and learn some things from me for what they can work on at home, I think that is so valuable. So I think that was a huge positive.
Yeah, I think I'm very fortunate to work in West Long Branch, where we've always been near the forefront of educational technology. We've always had a lot of technology available to our students. So we were lucky that when we went virtual, really, I think it was Friday the 13th of March, we were notified that we were going virtual, which what we thought was going to be 2 weeks or so. As we all know how the story played out, it was the remainder of the school year, and for many districts into this school year up to today. And like you said, the kids really rallied. We had to figure out a whole new system of what we were doing. In some ways, it kind of brought us back to basics, which was nice, focusing on the things that are really important. I think now being back in school, what's really nice for me to see is that the kids are so appreciative of being there, which is something you don't typically see in a middle school. Even though it looks different, it certainly sounds different. I've never had a quieter classroom in my 16 years of teaching. The kids are there. They know what they need to do to keep everybody safe. They know what they need to do to complete their work. And everyone's really just rallying together and just doing the best we can, taking things one day at a time.
It sounds like the idea of the resilience of the students, of everyone involved with that common goal is kind of been one of the things in the early part of this conversation that has stood out with Alicia, your comment about having the parents be able to see you, and Erica, you kind of saying how the social element, while yes, wearing masks and everything else, but still just physically being together. I think that's so interesting. And I know that the teachers and the therapists have so much more involvement with parents, as Alicia brought up. But Mike and Vinny, I'm curious, in this time as administrators, is there more communication with parents? Is it through avenues like this? Obviously, like Vinny said, Mike does a great job on social media, keeps everyone updated on Twitter and on YouTube. But at this time, has there been that need for more communication, more interaction with the parents because of everything that's going on?
I mean, I'll jump in. I certainly think communication is so important, even when things are going well. And so Absolutely. I think that's the case. And I think the biggest challenge, for educators and school leaders is just how quickly the narrative changes from one day to the next. And so, it's finding that balance to where it's, enough communication to keep everyone informed and still moving, along the same path together. But at the same time, just really being careful, because what we say tonight could change tomorrow, and tomorrow the next day, and it's just that part of it has just been, for me, the most frustrating piece of all of this. I think school teachers have planned tremendously. I think school administrators, and I know my superintendent in Old Bridge, has done an amazing job putting plans that really work. And before you actually get to execute the plan, the game changes. And so that part, just being able to pivot on the fly, has been tough when it comes to communication.
The way I see it, when Alicia and Erica spoke, it stuck with me because the parents are watching now the child be educated, which they've never had the opportunity to do before. And the communication is really pretty awesome. It could be pretty dangerous, right? In that scenario. And because people, when I'm here and his parents are asking questions in the middle of lessons, they're asking the teacher, can you explain that again? I missed it. But I also feel that the connection is stronger than it's ever been. When we first had children come back this year, after starting in a remote environment, we had the children who come back, and Alicia, you'll appreciate this because it was preschoolers with special needs. And what we were told was that it was the smoothest opening we've ever had. Typically, 3-year-olds come in, they have some phobia of school, there's separation anxiety, they're crying, the parents are crying, the teachers are crying. But this year, we had that introduction through Zoom, and everybody knew who each other were. So the transition was really great. But in terms of expectations, Eddie, of what people want, every now and then I'll miss a week with communication, and I get it. I get it from parents and everybody. Well, we didn't hear from you this week. A week went by. It's 7 days. We haven't heard from you. So the expectation now is, well, you've got the technology. You might as well communicate as often as you can.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've all seen, that either know people in the education system. We're all thankful that we're friends, but I also have a sister who is a Monmouth alum who's a teacher in Eatontown. My mom is a teacher. My fiance deals with teachers. So it really has taken over really all of our thought. And Mike, it's such an interesting point that you bring up. Now that we're so used to being connected, when you get a little busy and things kind of take you away, you start hearing from people. Maybe you weren't as communicative as before, but we know you're keeping in touch just as well as you were before. Just you're in your office right now at 7:20 on a Tuesday. We know how busy things can get. As we move on here on our 30-second Hawk Talk, we're so happy to have our education panel with us to just divert momentarily from what you're all going through now to then go back to it. But one of the key points, and why we wanted to bring this group together indeed, was the commonality. You all were education majors, and you all graduated with education degrees from Monmouth, and now we're able to make that move on. Monmouth for so many years has had such a tremendous reputation educating future teachers and future administrators. We see it every day now in what's going on with so many young teachers now out there, maybe having to go into new roles and learn and go on the fly with what's going on. So think about back to that time now. And I know that you're all kind of at different areas. And right before we came on, we were kind of reminiscing a little bit, everyone's time at Monmouth. But think back to your time at Monmouth, and do you at all have a chance to draw back in some of those experiences? And Alicia, we'll start with you, with maybe some things that you picked up from colleagues of yours through your time going to Monmouth and getting that education degree, that you look back and you think, you know what, I wasn't ready for this at the time, but I think back, I remember to what this professor said. I remember to what this one teacher that I had a chance to observe said. And do you at all draw back to your time at Monmouth now to prepare you and help prepare you for what you're going through now?
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to start, I got my undergraduate degree at Monmouth, and then I pursued speech language pathology as my master's. And we were required to do 2 internships, to get that degree. And Red Bank was one of my internships. So Monmouth not only, set me up with that degree, but landed me a job. So that in itself, I can't thank them enough for that. But one of the things that I remember my speech language pathology professors reiterating was just the compassion piece, not only for the children that you're working with or the adults that you may be working with, but for the parents. You know, how they might feel to hear their child has a disability, or, you know, a spouse of someone who has had a stroke or something like that. And I love that, because that's not part of the curriculum for speech language pathology, but, you know, Mom has really made sure to drive that in so that we were well-rounded therapists and, you know, saw things from the child's or the parent's perspective. And I think that is so important.
And when you think back to those times, and that's why this panel is so interesting. We have administrators, we have teachers, we have a therapist, and Erica now, when you think back, you know, your time with the women's lacrosse program, but also being a student in that program, you've coached, you teach now, you think back to those times, whether it was on the field or in the classroom, some of those opportunities that you were able to take from Monmouth and move now into your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Similar to Alicia, my undergraduate degree, well, hers was in education, but I needed to further my education because my undergraduate degree was in psychology. I worked for about 9 months afterwards in human resources, came to the realization that that really wasn't my calling, came back to Monmouth, was fortunate enough to serve on the coaching staff for 3 years for the lacrosse program while I pursued my master's in education. And I think every day I draw on my experiences as a student athlete, as a psychology major, as a master's in education student, all those lessons, not just classroom lessons, sure, they're important, but like we're saying, you know, this is, you know, 16, 17, 18 years ago, that's kind of changed. It's evolved, it changes every day, but now we're really looking at changes on the fly, being flexible, which is something they absolutely taught us in school. I think as classroom teachers and those who work in education, we have to show that flexibility, really day to day, sometimes minute to minute. But I think so many of us who go into this field were fortunate enough to be inspired by teachers and or coaches that kind of drew us into this industry per se, trying to kind of emulate that and give back and do the same things for these children that those coaches and those teachers had done for us. And I think, just to wrap this up, as a student athlete, there are so many skills that you acquire. Things like leadership, hard work, perseverance, camaraderie, teamwork that really serve you well, and I would guess in almost any career, but especially I think in the field of education. So very grateful for my experiences as a student athlete, as a coach, and then now as a teacher.
And I think it's interesting, two of our panelists have the unique perspective of playing for the same person, obviously, and head football coach Kevin Callahan, who started the program. And, you know, I'm going to go ahead and throw him into the educator role as well at Monmouth. Dr. McNeil always says that Monmouth coaches are indeed educators as well. So think about the dean of that group, it's Kevin Callahan. And, you know, Vinny, when you think back to your time recently, you've been and you have earned the honor of a doctor with what you've recently accomplished. But when you think back to your time, whether it was learning under KC, learning in the classroom, some of those things that maybe you take with you in your role as principal at Old Bridge.
Yeah, and you know, I'll outdate myself a little bit, Mike. Sorry here, the two of us, but you know, when we started at Monmouth, it was still Monmouth College, right? So sorry, Alicia and Erica, that was a long time ago. But you know, I think back to those days in the '90s with Coach Callahan, and you know, as you say, a leader, but you know, for us, he was a second dad and a mentor, and you know, to run into him now, 25, 30 years later, and he's still in that role for so many of us that have gone through his program. There's really nobody better in the business than Coach Callahan. Just a tremendous mentor, and really you see what he has done with the program at Monmouth, and it runs so much deeper than wins and losses, and you know, the evolution of a football program into, you know, full scholarship and playing in the Big South right now from where we've come from. Really, he's the guy, you know, and he surrounds himself with just tremendous coaches and people, and that program has always just been so special. I know to me and so many of the guys that played under Coach Callahan. And then having the opportunity to come back and through the doctorate program to see where the education department has come at Monmouth University, and being a part of it as an adjunct professor has been great. But then learning, you know, under the leadership of Dean Henning and people like Dr. Tracy Mulvaney and Dr. Carol MacArthur. I mean, just really tremendous educational professionals who have, again, elevated Monmouth to new heights. And so it's just it's so awesome to be a part of this university. And certainly you see it, right? You see everyone in this panel, whether we started there as undergraduate and went back as masters. Mike and I did our student teaching in Leonard Conroy School in Long Branch, almost 30 years ago. And here we are still in the game and working together. And so it's really just been awesome. I wouldn't want it any other way.
So, Mike, whether it was playing under Coach Callahan or being in Long Branch as long as you have, I had no idea that you've really worked your way up and really have the full experience of Long Branch. But to Vinny's point, now throw it to you, whether it was playing for Coach or your ability to get into that school district, rise to the top of it as superintendent, those things that maybe you've taken with you as now you lead a school district.
Yeah, so it was actually 23 years ago, Vin. It wasn't 30. So don't make us any older than we
30 sounds better. 30 sounds better.
Yeah, but I will say this. I mean, when you refer to Coach Callahan, and Vin, you put it perfect in terms of like a surrogate dad to all of us, and remain that way. To this day, I know if I have a question about something, even a life question, he's the guy that he's going to take the call, invite you in, sit you down. I have so many opportunities to observe leadership. Erica, when you mentioned that, because that's what we see with our coaches. I've watched the way he handled himself under great duress, whatever it was, whether it be, a clutch point in a game or something more serious. So I always watched his manner, and I'll tell you something I've always admired, and I probably stole from him. It was those awesome halftime speeches, Vin, where he's talking, he's a history guy. So he would come out with these great analogies in history, and we're heading into the gauntlet, and we get all fired up. But I love the way he delivered a story. He was just so talented, and I definitely stole that because I saw that he kind of put that platinum touch. He took his time. He was able to put his story together, articulate it in a way that would get us fired up, and he did it routinely, game after game, for all the 4 years I was there. And then just watching him deal with people from every background and treat everybody with respect. I've always admired that when somebody didn't necessarily know how to model to demonstrate respect, he modeled it right in front of them. And so I kind of love that about him. He's just a great person. And Vin, when you talk about the connection to the education department, I recently read that the admin at colleges, their role when they actually start getting involved with children, it actually helps the retention of college. So when we walked around, it was just kind of normal to see President Stafford, remember, like just walking around campus like she was a student there. And watching Admiral Gaffney do it, I mean, everybody all the way through. And now we're watching President Leahy just stay connected to the kids. I mean, he's delivering speeches and talking to the kids, whether it be about COVID or civil unrest. I mean, the entire university is really connected to the students there. And that's why I'm supporting the pin tonight, guys.
Well, and so many experiences that all four of our panelists have. I think one thing that ties them all together too, ultra successful as student athletes, now ultra successful in their career as educators. And before we dive into our next topic, I have to remind you that tonight's Hawk Talk episode is brought to you in part by the Monmouth Medical Center and RWJ Barnabas Health, the official healthcare provider of Monmouth University Athletics. To learn more and to learn also more about the physicians near you, visit rwjbh.org/Monmouth as we move on in our education panel here on Hawk Talk. So great for all of us to think back now to those times and to your times individually at Monmouth. But now, one of the things that I know I was most interested in getting all of your opinions, and you alluded to it a little bit to this point already, but as we get into, I think, this next topic, just a bit more specifically, whether you're hybrid, whether you're in person, whether you're virtual, one of the things I always enjoyed about my relationship with teachers and professors was the building of relationships and developing that synergy, whether it was in a classroom or whether it was in an assignment. And I'm just curious, and we'll start with the teacher on the panel. Erica, we'll start with you. During this time, and I know that you're in a unique position because you indeed are in person 5 days a week, but have you noticed you have to go about that relationship building, delivering impactful education to these students, obviously differently than maybe you would have before, and how indeed you go about doing that in a time like this?
It's certainly challenging, much better in person than it was when we were 100% virtual in the spring. We started with a fresh batch of students this year. They come in and they are socially distanced. They have their masks on. Sometimes, they come in, it's a little hard to recognize who they are. So it takes a little bit longer to get to know them. I think they were much more reserved, maybe being a little bit concerned about the situation happening, knowing that they weren't at each other's, in groups or at shared tables, nice and separate. So it's definitely been a little bit challenging. I had to be very mindful and intentional in some of the early activities I chose to do with my students, deviated a little bit from your traditional curriculum. Didn't do as much, get to know you stuff, but more opportunity to build those relationships, because it's so important that there's a trust there, there's an understanding there, knowing that we're all working together, we're all doing our best. We have to establish that rapport with our students before we can be impactful as educators. So I'm a little bit behind probably where I am typically as far as the standards and academics, but thinking that it's really important to address those social emotional needs. And I think it's really highlighted all the things that teachers, school administrators, just schools in general do for our students above and beyond just the, those ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. It's really a very involved process what we provide for our students and for our families. So I thought it was really important to touch on that very early on. And I think it was, in retrospect, a really good decision.
And so much of that is not in a textbook, right? It's not anything that you can look up and say, oh, well, here's how you build a relationship. You do X, Y, Z. Like you said, each district is different. Each classroom is different. And Alicia, each student I'm sure that you talk to, it's different as well, getting that specialized attention with your speech language pathology students. And you mentioned it now, the parents on some of these calls where you're really teaching everyone involved, whether it's the student and the parent. And have you still gone out, as Erica said, out of your way to try to reach through the screen, if you will, build that relationship? I know you're dealing with such, little ones, such young ones, but I know that matters as well.
Yeah, I mean, even with my third graders, with the virtual, it's like you have to put on a show the whole time because you're not there with them. So, I'm excited and I'm enunciating my voice so much more because you have to engage them and it has to be fun. A few sessions in a row and I wake up or stand up and I'm sweating, it's a lot of work and you're trying to keep them engaged. And, I have parents laughing in the background because I'm being goofy, but it's what you have to do. So, I mean, I have always, since I started as a speech therapist, the first few sessions is just build rapport. That is my goal, get to know the kids and have them trust me. And I think now more than ever, have them understand the expectations. So for Zoom, knowing when to mute and when to talk, and you'll have kids raise their hand and say, "Can I use the bathroom?" You're like, "Just go. It's okay. You don't have to do that here." So it's definitely been different, but it's still it's always been building trust. And I think, especially for Red Bank, trust is something that my kids don't always have with people at home. So school is their safe place. And I think now more than ever, we've seen that they need the love from school. And, even though we're 6 feet apart and we're wearing masks and we can't hug them or high five, we find little ways to make them feel that love through the computer or in person, distanced.
Well, I may rent, borrow, however it is. I'm on Zoom calls to plenty of adults all day who need to learn how to mute and how to take proper Zoom etiquette. So I think you're teaching third graders that. You are way ahead of the curve when it comes to always interested to get the perspective of those that are doing it, right, that are in the field. And, Mike, you and Vinny both in the administration, you both oversee teachers and therapists. And I know that, that is no small task where now you're duplicating that experience that both Erica and Alicia spoke of, times an entire high school for Vinny and Mike for you, an entire district. Is that, you mentioned leadership, you mentioned everything that you've done. How much of what you do and what you impart on these teachers is indeed relationship driven?
Yeah, so I'll jump in there, Mike. I mean, it's really critical. I mean, building positive relationships with our students is so critical. And their learning and their growth. And I think Erica, she touched on something that has been what's most difficult in my district right now. Last year it was different, right? Our teachers had relationships. They had built those up over the first 6 months of school. And then all of a sudden March happens and our worlds change. And, we had to scramble and do the best that we can to stay connected through the end of the year while dealing with everything else. And for us, being all virtual from the first day of school, we haven't seen our students yet. And so our teachers, it's such a difficult position that they're in to try to build these relationships without ever having that in person. They haven't met their students yet. It's all been this way. And so, for me, it's been trying to just support them as best we can, whether it's through their technology needs or through time or what have you. But it goes back to, I think, the first question that you asked, Eddie, as far as being freshmen all over again. And, I remember back to being a freshman, whether it was in college or high school or, sports, education, whatever it may be, that first year, really just being open to anything that's out there, anything that you can do. Just whatever it takes to get the job done. And I've seen that in my teachers, especially at Old Bridge High School. And that has inspired me and really allowed me to grow. And I had just met with a kid today. We were doing something and just had the conversation about what can I do to stay more connected to you. We have a lot of students at our school, and it's hard. And just to hear them say, hey, the videos that you do or the emails that you send, although it's not what we want, it still allows us, it makes us understand that, hey, you're there for us, what we're going through. And I think just that simple piece is so important. And again, just building the foundation, knowing that we will be together one day soon, and just building that foundation and putting the pieces in play. But it's been very difficult being all virtual, trying to build those relationships, which are so critical.
I also see it as just so many great points here. But I also know some of our focus over the past few years has been really targeted to making sure that all of us in education understand what it means to be in the eyes of somebody else. And we labeled it as empathy and creating this empathetic lens. But do we really understand what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes? When I first became a teacher, a practice we had here in the district was every preschool teacher visited every home of every child. Every home, every apartment. We were invited inside and we sat and we learned what the environment was like for every child. And the things you learn about a child from visiting their home, it's pretty compelling. And you can really develop this empathetic lens. And this is analogous to where we're today. We have teachers now that really don't understand what the life of a child is like. But now when you zoom into their home and you're seeing images of the background, you're seeing images of a kid, like Vinny joked before and said, sometimes you got to run and hide from your own kids on a Zoom call, right? You're hiding in your car. But we see children in closets, right? Because that's the only quiet space they could be in a bathroom, in a hallway. Our teachers are starting to realize that not everybody has a quiet learning space in their homes. And I think as challenging and as difficult it can be to see some of the environment that our children are living in and experiencing, I think it's really important. And I think it's beneficial to our teachers, not to reduce the standard and say, well, we shouldn't have these expectations. It's to uphold that high quality standard, but also to guide kids to meet that, understanding where they come from. So in terms of this communication overall and seeing where we're at today, I think hopefully we can all become a bit more empathetic and understanding.
And I think that would speak to not just what we're all talking about now in education, but so much else that's going on in the world right now. I think we all could use that lesson. I think that makes a lot of sense and it's very well said, Mike. And here on our Hawk Talk education panel, this has already been great. And those of us that aren't in the schools are learning so much about what's going on. I think it probably goes without saying, you've all touched on it a little bit, but to kind of go around the horn with all of the districts, and we'll start at the top of Long Branch, Mike, and then I'll lead us around. But when it comes to the technology, when it comes to the ability for maybe the districts to kind of lead that charge, but really leave it up to the students and the parents. Mike, let's start with you in Long Branch. From a technology standpoint, how was it? Take us from March to now. Happy with where things are? Happy with the ability of the teachers and the students to go ahead and deliver as much of what they need to through the different education, through the different communication and technology?
Sure. What a task it's been for everybody, from my technicians to directors, principals, and our teachers managing and collating all this data. And we actually gave out, I think, 1,650 MiFis that are paid for monthly. That's the number of families that we provided those to who did not have internet access in the home. And you're talking about a block from Monmouth University, right? With some of the wealthiest people you're ever going to meet who walk the campus. You have a community right next door that has such incredible needs. And I'll tell you, it was just really glaring and obvious separation from neighbor to community to borough to town on just the limited resources that exist. We also put all of our Chromebooks out there. I was worried to do it at first because it's literally like $1 million of equipment. But we had to make sure we put that back into the hands of kids, and that's helped. And we've had to train parents. Parents don't necessarily understand even what Google is, never mind Google Classroom, or how to connect, or how about Zoom, or try to explain to somebody who just came to our country that they have to have a unique passcode to get into your classroom. I mean, all of these things are so foreign, but it serves as a reminder of how fortunate many of us are, and how much work we have to do to close the gaps that exist, whether it be the homework gap, the digital divide. There needs to be a better solution. The solution that I propose, hopefully will exist one day. You know, when you walk around Monmouth and you enjoy the Wi-Fi everywhere, well, that's a geofence, and they put it over the entire campus, and everybody loves to sit down and play outside and connect. They do it in big major cities too, like Philadelphia and New York and parks. This is what needs to happen in communities that are highly impoverished, who people need access. It'd be so much easier. I mean, Alicia, you're shaking your head because Red Bank has a very similar population. Now you get our children a device, which is easy, but then getting them access to high quality content, high quality resources, filling out a college application shouldn't have to be a luxury or a privilege. It should just be a rite of passage. So we're pushing all of these things in this environment right now. But most importantly, it's important to get our kids just back into our schools so we can kind of learn to navigate the space and what the new normal is in terms of tech integration in schools.
And Alicia, as Mike was talking, he referenced that you were kind of nodding your head. Mike is in Long Branch, you're in Red Bank. Some of the similar issues that you've seen in your district as well?
Yes, I mean, definitely with the technology piece. And before we could even get to that, Red Bank has a huge population that receives free lunch and free breakfast. And, you know, that was a burden that my district had to take on and make sure that before we even deal with getting these kids technology, we have to make sure they're fed. So they handed out meals upon meals for families, 3 days a week from March until September, which was huge. And I think for the Red Bank community, that kind of brought them together a little bit more, which was good. And my district did give one Chromebook to every family that needed it. So that was, again, a financial burden that if these Chromebooks don't come back, that's a really big deal. And the internet issue, we tried to help as many families as we could to get connected to Wi-Fi, and there were a few programs and people donated to pay for Wi-Fi for families, which was so needed and so wonderful. Anybody, I speak Spanish. I was a Spanish major in my undergrad at Monmouth, so it's a huge Spanish speaking community. I was calling for teachers, calling families I'd never met before. What do you need? Do you have a Chromebook? Do you need Wi-Fi? Just every little thing had to be covered by the school. And, I think that piece really wore on teachers, because you do see that some kids do not have, they are in the closets doing class, and you want to give whatever you have to them, and we just couldn't. But I think giving this technology and being able to see them every day was what the kids needed in some cases. So that was really big, but it was a huge undertaking to get everything up and running. And I think for Red Bank, it took a couple of weeks, whereas, right next door in Rumson Fairhaven, they could be up and running the next day because they have the capability to do that.
And I think so many, again, of us that are either just friends of teachers, we seem to forget, right? School is more than just learning. Like you all just referenced, you're talking access to the internet, to technology, to food. There are so many layers that this encompasses. So Erica, as we go to West Long Branch, and you mentioned it, I think a few points ago, how well equipped your district was from a technology standpoint. So things have been going well for you and for your students. By the way, one of the beauties of a live broadcast, and I think all of you would appreciate this now, sometimes Zoom gets a little weird. Sometimes the internet gets weird. We're talking about internet. We may have that same issue, so we'll try to get that resolved. But while we try to bring Erica back on, Vinny, we've heard from Mike and from Alicia in both Long Branch and in Red Bank. Now, if you could speak to the Old Bridge side of things, how, with you being full remote, how the technology has gone in your school.
Yeah, I think Alicia brought up a great point too. It started with,
generally speaking, they have been going very well with regard to technology. We've been a one-to-one school.
I think Erica was back. Erica, I think we're having a little trouble right now with your line there.
Yeah, you may just need to just reconnect. I'm sure as a teacher, you have students that have to do that on a daily. Well, Erica's in person, but anyone who's doing it over Zoom, I'm sure has that issue. So while we try to get Erica back up, Vinny, you were saying.
Yeah, so just talking about access to food, right, and that was where it all kind of started from there. And then I'm very partial to my district. Our superintendent has done a tremendous job. Just making sure, as Mike mentioned, equity. Having access to the technology is certainly one step and so important. And our district went to one-to-one initiative this summer, and so we were able to hand out devices to every student throughout the district. So that was great. Then you get in hot spots and making sure that they have access to the internet, and again, working with our families to be able to use that technology at home. And now the shift has been for us getting our buildings ready to be able to handle all of our students and teachers, whether it's live instruction to students in person and at home, our students being on, and just making sure that our buildings have the capacity to handle all of that infrastructure and technology. And so, the shift has been there, but I think it does come down to equity. And I know Mike and Alicia spoke about that. What this has shown me is that all of our kids don't have access to the same opportunities, and that needs to change. And I think as we work on the other crisis, I certainly hope that educators know that way.
Yeah, and I believe one of the key points that we have heard in really our last few minutes of conversation has been that access. And it's actually something that on the university side, we hear Dr. Leahy talk about all the time. And it's one of his key points when it comes to Monmouth University is indeed trying to provide that access. And interestingly enough, Monmouth just recently welcomed in their most academically qualified and diverse class of students, which I think is a very interesting point that he has brought up in a few of his points. And we are here on our Hawk Talk Education panel. So happy that all four of our alums have been able to join us here on this call. And, we'd be remiss if we came on and didn't talk a little sports when it comes to your districts. And I know that so much is still to be decided, but we go first to the principal who just answered our question. And, Vinny, I know that you guys are remote now. Sports having a chance to come back in Old Bridge potentially. What's the timetable there to hopefully get athletics back and rolling at your school?
Yeah, and so Sports is happening right now, and I think we had a girls soccer senior night going on as we speak. Our football team had a big win on Friday night, and so it is nice to see again. We talk about our student athletes and relationships and seeing them out on the field competing. That's been really. It makes you feel like things are normal for at least a couple hours of that competition. So that's been great. Our district too did something different than I actually don't know of any other state, but we did have all of our student athletes were tested 2 weeks ago. Everyone had to go through mandatory COVID testing, and thankfully everyone came back negative. And really something good to see. They were open to do that. Kind of a big sigh of relief as they were able to get on the field and compete. So it's been nice seeing sports happening.
Well, it definitely has, and I know that obviously you all know about the fall athletic season at Monmouth. Now basketball, kind of the next sport. Mike in Long Branch now as well, and like Vinny said, I know that high school football is going on. I know you also as a superintendent. There's lots of different levels to what you oversee, but how are the extracurricular activities? How are athletics going in the district right now?
It's great, actually, great for the children. It's a mental health exercise above all. The competition's great. Getting the kids back on the field is so important. I've watched their spirit from July. We started doing COVID procedural, like a whole regimen, scanning for temps, coming in, asking questions, and just the energy on the field for workouts was amazing. And to come in last week and beat Middletown South was pretty good too. So we were pretty excited about that, being down 10-0 at halftime and coming back with a big win. But it's great to see the children out there. All the fall sports. We're worried about winter though. I mean, Eddie, we're concerned. There's already talks about basketball being scheduled, but I think everybody's trying to figure out how do you wrestle. Is that something that's even possible at this point? So I think it's going to be a day by day scenario, and we'll just hope for the best. But really important that our kids are out there for anything, just making sure that their wellness is met.
Well, I'm sure there's plenty of football alums who heard that, what you just said, probably saw the result last week. There's just a handful of guys I went to school with that I know were pretty upset that Long Branch beat Middletown South. I didn't have a dog in that fight, but I know that there are many former Eagles at Monmouth University that were probably upset at that. Erica, in the middle school now in West Long Branch, are sports happening, like both Mike and Vinny mentioned, at the high school level we know, but with where you guys are now, are there some extracurricular activities, some athletics going on at Frank Antonizzi?
Currently, right now, our sports are not yet underway. There have been some meetings and some discussions about the potential for having some more intramural type of sports in the fall, so the teams can get together, can practice, can maybe inter-squad scrimmage, so they get some of the experience without the exposure of traveling to other schools. That has not started yet, but it's certainly something that they're discussing and that they're hopeful will take place, because like you said, those winter sports, flu season being inside, it seems like a daunting likelihood that that's not going to happen. Luckily, right across the street at Shore, another high school where our students go, their sports are underway. So something to look forward to. And I also know in town a lot of the rec programs are happening. Obviously, with a lot of safety protocols in place to keep everybody safe. So at least the kids do have some opportunity for play, even though it's not for their middle school teams at this point.
Yeah, and I think the fact that when professional and high-level, FBS college sports coming back, and the students see all of that, it's great that they're able to take part in that as well. And it's been tremendous here this evening, being able to hear all of the different stories and all of the different experiences in all of your districts. But, we have this great group with us right now. We'd be remiss not to ask this next question, and we just went around the horn that way. But Alicia, we'll start with you, and then I'll throw it to all of our guests. I'm going to put you guys on the spot just a bit now. You're educators, and you're educating in a time that is unprecedented. So with that in mind, what advice would maybe you give to a student at Monmouth now interested in studying what you do? Put yourself in that spot. Mike spoke about earlier, putting yourself in the spot of the students that you educate. So let's do that with all of our panelists now. And Alicia, we'll start with you. What advice would you give to a student sitting in a classroom or sitting in their dorm room studying virtually at Monmouth right now who wanted to get in to speech pathology?
I would say to just love what you do. Truly, I mean, I feel like I work with the little kids, 3 years old to 10 years old, and your demeanor impacts them so much. They see when you're smiling, and if I say, I'm so proud of you, they feel that, versus if you're saying, sit down in your seat, they feel that too. So just, taking your bad days and putting them aside. And I think this goes for teachers and speech pathologists and parents, anybody that deals with kids. It's hard to do sometimes, but just remember that they're kids, and sometimes their behavior is due to something they're lacking. So for me, usually it's they can't communicate, and so they're acting out or they're throwing tantrums. And I have to remember that in the back of my mind, that to be empathetic and to remember that they're kids and they need to see a smiling face on a daily basis so that they can feel that too.
And Erica, let's say you could sit and have the opportunity to have a conversation with yourself or with someone who's interested in getting into teaching. What would, separate from maybe the advice of a pathologist, what would, from teacher to teacher, your advice be to someone who's interested in getting involved in what you do?
I would just tell anyone in education or even outside of it, just to follow your passion. That's really what drives you every day, makes you want to go to work every day. I know in education, we have good days and bad days. We have good years and bad years. But I think it's really important just to always look for those silver linings. Even in the middle of a global pandemic, there's been so many positives that have come out of it. It's a little bit cliche, but I know people will say that, not every day is good, but there is good in every day if you look for it. And sometimes I think at the middle school level, we have to look a little bit harder. When you work with the younger students, you really see an impact that you have. You teach them to tie their shoes. You teach them to read. You teach them how to add and subtract. They want to give you hugs. They love you. In high school, sometimes you get an idea of where they're going next, what they want to do. And sometimes in the middle, we kind of get lost in that. So I think it's really important just to, even though you don't see it every day, looking for the positive and knowing that you are being impactful, even if it's in small ways. So really find your passion and just work hard every day to do your best.
And like we talked about earlier, that's another common theme, right? Taking those little wins, however small they be. There is no small win in a time like this when you can kind of build momentum into maybe something bigger. And Vinny, if you could reach back in time, right, what would be that advice that you would give to someone sitting in a classroom at Monmouth that you think would be especially valuable at a time like this?
Yeah, and thankfully for me, 23 years later, I would do it all over again. And as difficult as this time is right now for all of us in education, I still think it's, certainly the best profession. And I have 4 kids and would be proud of each of them if they, decided to go down the path of education. I think my advice to students, again, they may forget, what you said, but they're not going to forget how you made them feel. And I think as educators, it's just so important. Each of our interactions, each of our moments, can have just a lasting, lifelong effect. As we sit here on this call, I'm sure you can all just think back to that person, that teacher, that coach, that educator, as we talked about, Coach Callahan was for so many of us through the football program, but that just the way they made us feel and how they inspired us to be better people. And so I would just tell them, sometimes you got to forget about the teaching part so much and just focus on the people part.
And Mike, I know that you have so much experience in the education field, really at every level. Hearing what our 3 previous panelists said as well. Now, curious to get your thoughts on what advice you indeed would give to that student sitting in a classroom who wants to become an educator.
I'd probably say read Steve Jobs' book, where he talks about the classes that he thought were meaningless and the impact they had. He talks about the calligraphy course he took, and that was the idea behind the fonts that we see in Apple today. So as you're walking through this journey on a college campus, and you have your concentration in terms of your major, you have your core classes, you have your electives, each of those are a piece to your educational journey. Take them serious, and you never know which class is going to be the difference maker when you apply for a job or when you're actually in the position. I certainly know some of the classes I didn't even consider taking, I wish I did back then, in terms of right now, healthcare, data privacy, all these things I'm trying to figure out on my own. And back then, I probably would have taking an elective class in that. So take this journey for what it is, and make the most out of it, because it's pretty likely that the entire process has meaning to you.
Well, I think any piece of what the four of you just said is really fantastic. And I've had those similar regrets. There's certain classes I wish I would have went back and taken, and now we get a little bit extra time at home. So now we can read up a little bit. We can watch some YouTube videos. We can kind of get brought up to speed. But Alicia, Vinny, Erica, and Mike, thank you all so much for joining us here this evening. I know you're all incredibly busy with everything that's going on. On behalf of all of us as well, thank you not only for coming on, but for the great work that you all do in all of your districts. And on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for joining us here this evening.
Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you, Eddie.
Thanks so much, Eddie.
Thanks, Eddie. That's great. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Good
Go
luck.
Hawks.
You too.
Fly Hawks. Fly Hawks.
Fly Hawks.
Our-
Fly Hawks.
That is our education panel here on Hawk Talk, and I'll tell you what, this was about as fun as we could have hoped for. I have to thank all of our guests again for joining us. If you missed any of our conversation here tonight, you can watch it back at any time in a variety of places, mammothhawks.com, in the video tab here on the Athletics Facebook page, as well as the YouTube channel for the Athletics Department at youtube.com/mammothhawks. For all of us here with the Mammoth Digital Network, we appreciate you watching our Hawk Talk education panel. Thank you so much. Have a good night.